And Joe Cirincione, president of Plowshares Fund and author of Nuclear Nightmares, Securing the World Before It's Too Late. Lucy, let me start with you in the latest reporting that we have. North Korea says the test was a, quote, show of force to the new Trump administration. What else do we know?
Hey, Kate. Well, it certainly was a show of force aimed at getting the attention of the new administration in the White House. Interestingly enough, Donald Trump and the Japanese prime minister were just sitting down to their iceberg wedge salads at the Mar-a-Lago resort in Blue Cheese. They learned of this launch, according to the reporting that's out there. But, Kate, if this was intended to provoke President Trump into some sort of a bellicose reaction, the North Koreans failed on that end. But there is a lot of reason to be concerned. This missile, as far as we understand, flew farther than any other previous North Korean tests, about 300, just over 300 miles before dropping into the Sea of Japan, as you said. It's also reportedly the first time the North Koreans claim to have used something called solid fuel. Now, if that's true, that's a pretty big step forward, because it means that instead of basically relying on missiles that have to be fueled on a fixed launch pad, the North Korean military could then drive these missiles anywhere and fire them at will from mobile launchers. So that does pose more of a threat. We also saw a strong condemnation today from the Pentagon, with the spokesman Jeff Davis saying that the U.S. will take all necessary measures to deter and defeat threats like these. The UN Security General also condemning this launch ahead of the Security Council meeting on this issue today. The Pentagon confirming that this launch seemed to travel further than other tests in the past, but stressed again that the U.S. is able to defend against these kinds of attacks, and more importantly, that the U.S. is committed to protecting allies like Japan and South Korea. Kate?
All right, Lucy, thanks so much for the update. Let me bring in Gordon and Joe now. Gordon, let me start with you. After North Korea test fires this missile on Saturday night, President Trump then arranges very quickly a late-night sort of briefing for the press where he stands and listens to the Japanese Prime Minister Abe, and then he says this. Let me play the sound.
I just want everybody to understand and fully know that the United States of America stands behind Japan, its great ally, 100%. Thank you.
It's brief. He chooses to frame it within the context of the Japanese-U.S. relationship. Was that sort of the only way he could go?
Well, I think so, because the Trump administration has out what to do with North Korea. It's a complex problem because it involves not only the North, but of course China and Iran. So, you know, right now, I don't think this administration, especially with all the issues about Flynn, is in a position to come up with a coherent response, because this is the most difficult challenge that they face at this moment.
Joe, what was your take on that response and sort of the whole thing that played out on Saturday night?
Well, I'm very glad that the president said as little as he did. Stay off Twitter, Mr. President. Don't try to make nuclear policy on Twitter. Don't engage in bellicose rhetoric with the North Koreans. In some ways, that's what they want. It validates their view of the world. Stay calm. The big risk here is that belligerent rhetoric on both sides could escalate into belligerent actions, particularly as we get to the end of the month and South Korea and the United States are engaged in large-scale military exercises that always provoke the North Koreans. So this is a time for calm rhetoric. Fortunately, the test, which may lead to a long-range missile in the future, is not that long-range missile now. They do not have a missile that can attack the United States. They do not have a nuclear warhead that could be put on a missile to attack the United States, but they are working towards that technology. You let them keep doing this, and they will be able to threaten the United States. That's why it's urgent that the president do what he said he would do during the campaign and talk to Kim Jong-un.
I would love for both of you, Gordon and Joe, to help us understand the state of North Korea's expertise or abilities when it comes to missiles and technology. And Gordon, you were talking about this precise ballistic missile test and what that hardware was, essentially. Do we know where it comes from?
Well, the missile that was tested yesterday is a land variant of what they tested on August 24th, which was from a submarine or an undersea platform. A number of missile experts that what was tested on August 24th really is a Chinese JL-1. And that means that somehow the North Koreans may have gotten technology from the Chinese. This is not to say that the Chinese gave it. The North Koreans
could be copying it.
They could have been copying it, they could have stole it, or they could have gotten it from a country that China proliferated it to. You know, at this point, we don't know the answers to any of these questions, but the most important thing is we need to start asking, and we need to start asking fast, because if China's involved in proliferating missile technology to the North Koreans, then our problems are a lot larger than they now appear.
Joe, go ahead. What do you think about the state of their expertise?
Well, Gordon's exactly right. This is a very capable program, and they've been testing more in the last 20 months than they've tested in their previous program combined. Look, they're still far behind. This missile only traveled about 340 miles. It's not a long range. It's a short-range threat. The bad news is we think this is just the first stage of a missile that they want to build. And as you reported, it's solid-fueled, meaning it won't have to undergo the lengthy, observable fueling that a liquid-fueled missile has to do. And that means that you can take this missile, put it on a mobile launcher, maybe put it on a submarine, and if you put other stages on top of it, you could hit that long range. Look, this is why you've got to change policy. We've tried sanctioning the North Koreans, hasn't stopped them. We've tried ignoring the North Koreans, hasn't stopped them. We've tried getting China to deal with the North Koreans' force, hasn't worked. The only way to stop the North Koreans is to negotiate a freeze in their program. They're not going to give this up. But if Donald Trump can negotiate a freeze, like we did with Iran, roll back the program, pause the program, that can give us time to try to figure out a permanent solution.
Negotiating with the North Koreans, Gordon, that means dealing with a dictator, right?
Well, that's not the problem. But I think the problem is that North Korea is not going to give up its programs, as Joe mentioned, and it's probably also not going to freeze them, because in the 1994 agreed framework freeze, they were cheating behind the scenes. When they were promising to stop all their activity, they then started a uranium program instead of the plutonium one that we saw. There's a lot of complicated issues here about talking to the North Koreans, and I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but nonetheless, this administration needs to come up with a coherent response, which is not just North Korea, but as I said, all the countries that are involved in this program.
Joe, quick last word.
You don't have much choice. It's not true that we can defend against a North Korean missile. The interceptors that we have in Alaska, these work only half the time under ideal, carefully scripted tests. If North Korea gets this capability, there's no defense against it. The best defense is to stop them from getting it in the first place. That's why you have to try talks.
Joe Cirincione, Gordon Chang, and Lucy Kafanov over in London, thank you to